what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, June 22nd, 2017 here. A little rocky start this morning. My main computer is having some kind of issues. I don't know if it's malware or what it is, but it was right down to the wire getting it up and running for the program this morning. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room twiddling our dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to put you on the air with your comments and questions. Now, getting on into it, as you know right now, the big story is the GOP health care bill. And again, it is following the structure of the House version of the bill that passed a couple of months ago, but it's running into some difficulty. At least 4 GOP senators are saying they cannot support it in its current form. And, of course, it only takes 3 defecting GOP senators to defeat the bill. So right now the bill is not going to pass as it currently is. A lot of people have got some comments and criticisms about it. And in fact, as that caller who called in yesterday mentioned, one of the big problems, of course, is it's slashing money to Medicaid programs across the country on which a lot of people are now very dependent. And this might be just an effort to drive more and more of the elderly and disabled to seek private insurance. A lot of other people are very concerned. They're calling that this bill has massive tax cuts for the wealthy. That's not exactly what's going on. What they're doing is they're ending the taxes that were added to the wealthy to fund Obamacare. And the last part, and this part I agree with, they're ending the mandate, saying that you have to buy insurance that complies with some arbitrary standard. You don't have to have health insurance. It's not mandated anymore. And I think this is a really good thing. Not because I think people should not have health insurance. I think you should. But as we clearly saw under Obamacare, the ending of the mandate and the call that you had to have these Obamacare compliant policies resulted in a tremendous amount of abuse from the health insurance industry with sky-high premiums and sky-high deductibles, and a lot of people who were forced to give up their existing health insurance and switch to the Obamacare policies suffered serious financial harm, including yours truly, on this very issue. So this ending of the mandate, if the health insurance companies want to stay in business, they're going to have to work to make their products attractive to consumers. And I know in this economy that's a very, very difficult thing to do. People just don't have that kind of money. But it means they're going to have to lower their premiums, they're going to have to lower the deductibles, and they're going to have to improve service to their potential customers, or they're not going to make any sales. And again, when Obamacare was first being pitched, I pointed out the events that happened after automobile insurance was made mandatory. And we went through exactly the same thing. The premiums went up, the quality of service went down, and the corporations got this attitude of, well, they're going to have to buy this from somebody anyway, so we can just do whatever we want. And we saw a huge amount of damage caused by Obamacare, along with the fact that it was hideously inefficient. And if you look at how many doctors have been added to our medical system over the last few years as compared to administrators, you'll see that administrators are outstripping doctors by 5 to 1 to deal with all the complexity and the paperwork. And those administrators are part of the reason that the cost of American medical care is going right through the roof. We have the highest, most expensive medical care on planet Earth, and it is ranked something like 39th in quality. And the average life expectancy of Americans is currently in decline, while the number of Americans who are dealing with chronic multiple illnesses is increasing. So something went wrong here, and I'm not saying that the current repeal and replace Obamacare bill is a real solution. I think we ought to go back to an earlier, simpler time when we had a medical system that was affordable and worked, or we need to go single payer. And, of course, as you know, out in California, there was that study that was done that showed if they went single payer, it would cover everybody in the state of California and save billions and billions of dollars. So I think a lot of the senators here are, those who were around when Obama was there. They want to keep helping out the health insurance industries who have been very generous campaign donors. And, of course, all the Democrats are going to vote against this because it's Obamacare. It's got his name on it. It's his signature accomplishment. And we're going to be doing all of this stuff to make sure it is part of his legacy, except, of course, that it is a legacy that really is not working very well. Okay, let's go on over to the war zones. There's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of people can be forgiven for being very, very concerned about how many wars there are, how long we've been at war in all of these countries, and how there doesn't seem to be an end in sight other than full-on global conflict, which could easily go nuclear. Now, again, back on Monday, I put up these two comparison maps of the situation on the ground in Syria. And we're going to do a quick little shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So back on Monday, I put up these two maps, one from March and one from today, that shows how much ISIS is losing in Syria. And as you know, despite all the rhetoric that the U.S. Was in Syria to get ISIS and al-Qaeda, they've been in there supporting them. And now the U.S. is getting into a panic. They're about to lose in Syria. It would be the first recognized military defeat since Vietnam. And a loss in Syria puts the rest of the war agenda, such as Iran and all these other countries, at serious risk of collapse, and with it the U.S. economy. So basically this article over in antiwar.com is saying that as ISIS loses ground in Syria, the U.S. is now on a collision course with Syria and Iran. And, of course, we know the U.S. has actually been at war with Syria, trying to replace Bashar al-Assad for 5 years, and they've been talking about war with Iran for year after year after year. Remember that video of John McCain dancing around on stage going, bomb, 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 Iran, bomb, bomb, bomb? And, he thinks it's a big joke. You know, it's a big joke. And they're trying to link Syria to Iran, where there's some legitimacy, especially after Iran launched missiles onto ISIS inside Syria. They're now trying to link Yemen to Iran. That, like the Russian interfering with our elections, is mostly mythical here. Okay, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Clinton, Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I know you changed subjects, but this is about the healthcare mandate.
Yes.
Here's my really big problem with it, Mike, is that it mandates healthcare. Okay, it's like my union's healthcare. It has procedures that I would never agree with, and you're being forced, okay, this is what we'll cover, even though I would never do chemotherapy. I would never take meds for high cholesterol. I would do that with diet and juicing or whatever. I would never take that stuff. And so that's my biggest problem with mandated health care. It just caters to the big pharmaceutical companies. You put up a post earlier that 97% of people who've had root canals, 97% of people who had terminal cancer had root canals. I just had a tooth came out. It was filled with amalgam, and all the bumps on my legs disappeared, and my brain fog disappeared. So it just mandates health care that isn't even an exact science yet. I mean, you know,
well,
I disagree with a lot.
It's never going to be an exact science, and unfortunately, a lot of things become recommended practice, and then decades later we find out they're dangerous, like the mercury amalgam used in tooth fillings. When it first came on out, everybody said it's great, it's easy to use, and it's 100% safe, even though it's mercury, and mercury at that time was known to be a neurotoxin. And as I was telling Dr. Default during her interview, if you remember the Alice in Wonderland, the character of the Mad Hatter, that was actually based on a real cultural stereotype of the day when Lewis Carroll wrote the book, because milliners making hats were exposed to mercury vapor, and they would go slowly insane over the years. And so in hindsight, it isn't really a surprise that these mercury amalgam fillings were a cause of a lot of chronic health issues.
And they want that. My dentist she was actually spraying my teeth once. This was about 15 years ago with fluoride. I'm trying to fight these cavities, and I said, get that rat poison out of my mouth. And she goes, oh, no, this is all approved stuff. And I go, maybe you should do a little search on Google. And she was very embarrassed because they only know what they're taught.
Yes.
And I'll give you another example with my bronchitis. I have found out that there was a video that you posted once about this guy in New Zealand had pneumonia, and his family demanded IVs of vitamin C, and it completely cured him. And when they were giving him liposol vitamin C, and when I tried it, it was the only thing that has ever worked on my bronchitis and my acute coughing. Mm-hmm. And I've lived with that all my life. I'm 60 years old, and now I finally have something that works every time. It works within a few hours. And the doctors don't know this stuff, and they probably couldn't prescribe it even if they wanted to. It's not the best system in the world, our medical system.
Well, no, because it's become completely corrupted by big money. I mean, back during Richard Nixon's term in office, they basically changed the laws that limited the amount of profit medical facilities could make off the patients, because they understood patients, except for plastic surgery, which can go horribly wrong. Patients don't choose to get sick. They don't choose to be injured. And it was considered unfair of the medical establishment to try and exploit people for illness and injury. But that all went away when Richard Nixon basically helped change the laws that turned the medical establishment away from health care and to basically another profit-based enterprise, the health maintenance organizations. And unfortunately, we are getting dangerously close to where you're going to be forced to take certain treatments whether you want them or not. We're already at the stage right now where they're mandating vaccines, and who knows what's going to be next. And as far as your doctors and dentists and other medical practitioners, more and more of the curriculum at their medical schools is now being set by the providers of pharmaceuticals and instruments and other equipment.
Right. And California, if a doctor says your kid has cancer and you don't put them on chemo, they can come and take your kids.
Yes.
Unbelievable. And
no, it's very believable in the fascist states of America. All right, thank you for the call, Clint. We're going to let you go here. And getting on out here, let's see, Battle for Mosul. There is a little bit of a disagreement. Apparently, this mosque, the Al-Nuri Kabir Mosque, which is in old Mosul, and that's where ISIS leader al-Baghdadi proclaimed a caliphate back in 2014. It has been blown up, and according to this article that we got out of Southfront, ISIS blew it up. They seem really big on blowing up other people's buildings, especially archaeological remains. However, ISIS is saying the mosque was actually destroyed in a U.S. airstrike. So kind of hard to know who to believe on that one, given that everybody's lying about war. In fact, I think it was Senator Hiram Johnson said truth is the first casualty of war. And we're certainly getting a textbook example of that right now. The Russian Foreign Ministry has declared that the U.S. buildup in southern Syria does violate international law. And it does. It's basically an invasion of another sovereign nation. There's been no congressional declaration of war. There is no resolution from the United Nations Security Council. The United States government has no legal right to be in Syria whatsoever. And the U.S. government is clearly in the wrong, legally and morally here. But that's never stopped them before, unfortunately. Now, there's another article, this came out of Sputnik News, talking about eventual U.S. plans for Syria, emphasizing that they're not making any commitment to territorial integrity. In other words, they're already talking about breaking Syria up, giving part of it to the Kurds, maybe Israel gets the Golan Heights for keeps. And again, it's another example of the stunning double standards and hypocrisies that come out of Washington, D.C., because when Crimea voted to leave Ukraine, the United States opposed it, refused to recognize the referendum, saying that Ukraine's territorial integrity had to be preserved, even though the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights gives everybody in every member nation of the United Nations the right to vote to secede, to go away and form their own country. And the United States, both as a member of the United Nations and the host country to the United Nations, simply ignored that to demonize Crimea. And because they refused to recognize the referendum, the default situation is Russia stole Crimea. And we're still hearing that all over the media, Russia stole Crimea. And as I said, it makes about as much logical sense as a guest at a wedding declaring that the bride did not have a right to marry the groom, therefore by default the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's about as much logical sense as it makes here. Now, Australia has decided they're going to resume their airstrikes in Syria when Russia came on out, said that any non-Syrian, non-Russian aircraft flying west of the Euphrates would be tracked and treated as a potential target and asked to leave, and if they refused, could be shot down. Australia said, well, we're going to pull on out. Apparently somebody got a phone call down there in Canberra, and because today they're saying, yes, they're going to rejoin the U.S. coalition and blow things up like mosques and whatnot. Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron is basically signaling that France is abandoning the policy of regime change in Syria, saying that there's no legitimate successor to Assad, and getting rid of Assad is just going to flood Europe with millions more refugees, and it could actually cause an escalation of the war into a regional war across the entire Middle East, or even worse, World War III, and he's absolutely right about that. So France's participation in the coalition in Syria is now going to be limited specifically to attacking ISIS. So France is actually being the good guy over there, although France does not have Syria's government permission to be there either. Very alarming story, and hardly the only person saying this, and again, this is from antiwar.com. The U.S. and Russia continue to inch toward confrontation in Syria. And that's exactly what's going on. The U.S. is now directly attacking Syrian forces. I think we're up to a count of 5 now. They're clearly sending a message. And remember that Sukhoi 22 that was shot down by the United States. And by the way, that may have been retaliation for al-Baghdadi being killed. But for whatever reason, there were Russian aircraft in the area. And that U.S. warplane could have shot one of the Russians down very easily. But again, the goal may have been, they got a pilot who was willing to take the risk, flew up there, shot down the Syrian Sukhoi in the hope that the Russians would then engage him, and that would open up a door to say, well, Russia has attacked the American aircraft, therefore the war is on. But at this point, it's getting hard to find anybody who isn't deeply concerned that we are clearly headed to a direct military confrontation with the Russians. And I don't think that's really a good idea. Now, Turkey is concentrating its troops around the Kurdish city of Afrin in Syrian Kurdistan. And so, obviously, the signals are going on out that there's going to be an offensive on that city. This is coming from the Syrian Kurds. And they're digging in and getting ready to deal with that here. Apparently up in Afghanistan, there was a car bomb explosion outside the New Kabul Bank. 22 killed, 54 injured. Now, getting back on down to Qatar, the Saudis have a new list of demands for Qatar. And apparently it's a little bit longer than the last one. It includes what was on the last list. Nobody really knows what's on it. Other than severing all diplomatic ties with Iran, the permanent shutdown of Al Jazeera, and a pledge never to publicly contradict any GCC member nations. So, basically taking them off the political board. Okay, we should be hearing music. There it is. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and we're still dealing with technical issues, and I'm sorry for any loud noises that went out over our BAM user feed, but this equipment is old and corroded, and of course in Hawaii's salt air, everything acts like it's made out of compressed rust. And actually, under the poor quality manufacturing of the United States, maybe that's exactly what they're doing. They just get some rust and corrosion, put it in a mold, slap it on, put some paint on it, and say, see, this is a quality product here. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's mainly like kind of security question on, you know, as when you call certain businesses, they say this phone call may be recorded, and they have to have your authorization to record that. Now, taking that and referring to what's going on with the James Comey possible tapes that may exist or not exist, when you walk into, the question is, if you walk into the Oval Office and you sit down and have a talk, is it at his discretion to record? Is there always a recording going of conversations in that room?
Well, obviously, when Richard Nixon did it, that was a huge upset. But as it turned out, a lot of presidents have done it. Lyndon Johnson did it. The idea is you never find out about it until it's used as blackmail material. But technically, under the law, it's illegal to record somebody without their knowledge. Now, some states have a law where everybody must know the message is being, or the conversation is being recorded. In some states, only one party has to know the conversation is being recorded. And in all states, if you're recording somebody else's conversation, that is definitely against the law. The problem with government is that they basically don't follow the law. But Trump has hedged his bets on this. He's out there saying that he himself has not made any recordings, but with all the surveillance going on all over, he has no idea if recordings actually exist of his conversations with Comey. So he's kind of coming down on both sides. A little bit of uncharacteristic weasel wording coming out of Donald Trump. But again, it's an honest assessment. Everything is compromised. You can be spied on with your cell phone. Unless you're in a Faraday cage and you've left all your electronics outside, it's very hard to presume that anything you say is in privacy. Now, as far as when you call, for example, a customer service line and they say, we're recording, we need your permission, what that really is doing is trying to reassure you that they're going to give you the best service that they can, rather than actually recording it. And I imagine that in some companies they actually do make the recording, but it's more to make sure that their employees are doing the proper job rather than actually invade the privacy of the customer.
In the news today they were talking, James Comey was quoted as saying, I hope there are recordings of our conversations. So I don't know, he's throwing it back at Donald Trump, but I was just curious about the legality of it, because I always understood you have to inform somebody this can be recorded, and they have to have your authorization for that. But a government, you know, like I said, they break the rules all the time. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Hey, one other last thing. I was listening to, in my drive around town today, listened to Terry Gross and her show on NPR. I call it Foul Air, because that's actually what it's become, the show. But she had an expert on there talking about how they believe Russia is doing cyber attacks. Their little guinea pig is Ukraine as their test pilot of cyber attacks against Ukraine. And the thing I had a problem with is they're always using speculation as fact.
Yes.
And I just see that all the time in their broadcasts as speculation. Might be, maybe, it could be. They believe all these words of speculation, but they try to pass them off as fact. And, of course, the Russia bashing continues on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. Now, I don't know what the current state of Russia's cyber weaponry is, but looking at all that's coming out of WikiLeaks and the Vault 7 dump, it's very obvious that the United States has invested huge amounts of money building the weapons with which to wage cyber war. And remember, it was uncovered one of the specialized cyber war units was set up to carry out cyber attacks on targets and plant evidence to make it look like it came from a different place, like from Russia or China.
Right.
So speculation where the stuff comes from, you don't really know. Steve, got to let you go.
You're referring to the Vault 7 stuff, right?
Yeah, that's the Vault 7 stuff. All right, Steve, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting on into our news here. France rolls out the red carpet for Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. This is considered a continuance of Macron's reset of French-Russian relations. And this may coincide with Macron's decision to no longer seek the ouster of Assad down in Syria. Now, Russia's Deputy Minister of Economic Development, Alexei Gruzdev, is saying that Moscow has renewed intergovernmental cooperation with two-thirds of the European Union's member states, despite the tensions with Brussels. So what this is telling us is the individual member states of the European Union are hopping off this U.S.-Brussels anti-Russia bandwagon. They don't want to go along with it. And again, the reason is they can see the signs. This next world war, like the two before it, is going to be fought in part on their front lawns. And they don't want that. No sane person would. And again, Americans, we don't really have any reminders of war in our country. There are a few preserved battlefields, and those are now under attack by the PC open border, get rid of the Confederacy people. You know, the statues and monuments are being taken down. At some point, they're going to just say, well, we should just turn over these battlefields to, shopping mall developers. You wait, that'll be coming. Apparently, the Balkans are heating up again, and everybody was kind of hoping that after Kosovo had their war of secession from Serbia in the 1990s, that it might stabilize for a while, but apparently everybody's talking about moving those borders around again here. Now, down in Israel, Ehud Barak is out there saying that Israel faces a slippery slope towards apartheid, which is kind of a study in the obvious. Although he is saying that we're not apartheid yet, but we're heading that way. Actually, I think you're there. Even people from the former government of South Africa are saying that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, a lot of people are starting to wonder who Nikki Haley is actually working for, because she's supposed to be the United States ambassador to the United Nations. But it seems like all she ever does while she's up there is talk about Israel and how unfair the United Nations is to Israel and how unfair the United Nations Human Rights Council is to Israel, and they should not be, ganging up on Israel, and Israel is wonderful. Well, she's going to be working for Israel. She should be Israel's ambassador to the UN, and we need to get a new one who's going to take care of this country. So, moving on here. Let's talk about weapons here. There is one area where our weapons are the best in the world, and for the most part seem to work, and that's the drones. And there's an article out here in AFSA.org talking about killer drones and the militarization of the U.S. foreign policy. And remember, when the drones were first introduced, they were for surveillance only. Now they're mounting missiles on them and bombs on them, and they're using them as attack aircraft. And again, this expands the number of countries the U.S. government is now militarily involved in, because there are countries where the U.S. will send in drone strikes. We don't have tanks there, we don't have airplanes there, we don't have boots on the ground. We're not theoretically at war with them, but they'll send in the drones and blow people up saying, well, we're going after the terrorists. And they identify targets by profiling. And these suspected terrorists never get their day in court. There's no evidence saying that they are who somebody thinks they are. But it's not going to win us any more friends in these countries. And again, one of the worst abuses of the profiling was this idea that the taller men could be assumed to be militants or in ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And this drone operator saw a group of people walking across the street. One guy was exceptionally tall. So we targeted them, and it turned out to be a school teacher and the kids just walking across the street. Totally innocent people blown to shreds. Now, nobody is going to respect any government that dishes out punishment that punishes the innocent. Nobody's going to respect that at all. The whole idea of war crimes, the Geneva Convention, all those various conventions on war, is to confine the battle between active military forces in order to protect the civilians who are not part of what is going on. And the U.S., unfortunately, is targeting a lot of civilians. Over in Syria, they may have killed more civilians than ISIS has. Now, we were talking the other day about down in Saudi Arabia, where there's been a major change. King Salman has basically declared his son, Mohammed bin Salman, as heir to the throne, and basically kicked his nephew out of the job. And it turns out that Mohammed bin Salman is very pro-U.S., pro-West, and so a lot of people are very concerned that Saudi Arabia, especially if the older King Salman passes away, that Saudi Arabia is going to be even more cooperative with the United States in proxy wars in the Middle East like the one going on in Yemen right now. Yesterday we talked about North Korea putting an offer on the table where they would declare a moratorium on the testing of nuclear weapons and ICBMs as long as the United States and South Korea and Japan and the rest of them would basically pull away from the Korean Peninsula and stop sailing along their borders and just rattling the sabers. And there is a lesson of history to go back and look at. We have talked many times about how Franklin Roosevelt spent the year before the attack on Pearl Harbor goading Japan, following this 8-step plan by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. And one of the steps was to constantly sail American warships along the coast of Japan, which to Americans wouldn't seem like any kind of a big deal. We're used to our warships going anywhere in the world. But to the Japanese sensibilities, it was a horrible insult. It was an affront. And the same thing applies to the North Koreans. So a lot of people would like to see North Korea back down. Even Secretary of Defense Mattis is saying, we really don't want to go in there. And so it would be nice to calm that one down. All the more so because the most recent test of a ballistic missile interceptor, which happened last night, failed miserably. Apparently, they launched a medium-range ballistic missile from the Pacific Missile Range Facility, which is over on the next island out that way. And the destroyer John Paul Jones, which is running the top of the line, the brand new Aegis Baseline 9C2 combat system, fired a Standard Missile 3 Block 2A, also the latest and greatest, and they missed the target. It is not a reliable weapon system. And anybody who is being goaded to the point of nuclear combat with the United States of America is going to realize all they need to do is double up the number of missiles, and there's a good chance one of them is going to get through. Because the overall success rate of these ballistic missile interceptors is less than 50%. Now, they were trumpeting about the successful intercept for the last 3 tests before this one in a row, but there was a whole string of failures before that. And you look at Russia and how many tens of thousands of warheads they have. You can fire off a MIRV missile and just tell, 2 MIRVs per city. There's a good chance one of them will get through. And don't forget, this ballistic missile interceptor was aiming at the entire rocket. Aiming at a MIRV reentry vehicle, that's a lot more difficult. That cone shape is a naturally radar stealthy shape, and it's surrounded, during reentry through the atmosphere, it's surrounded by an ionization cloud that it just sucks up radio signals. In the early days of space flight, When the Mercury and Gemini craft were coming back to Earth during reentry, there was no radio communication, no telemetry whatsoever. And in fact, same thing with Apollo. And it wasn't until the space shuttle and what was called the TDRS satellites, there are 3 of them up in geostationary orbit, able to send messages straight down to the shuttle during reentry, that they were able to communicate during reentry because of that ionization shield. So it's really an almost impossible task here, and they've had another failure. And I hope that will inspire a certain degree of caution. Now, speaking of North Korea, as you know, there's this big stink over this Otto Warmbier, who was a student that went to North Korea and was thrown in jail, we are told, for stealing a propaganda poster. 15 years does seem a little bit extreme. But apparently people are digging into his background. And over at Gilad Atzmon's website, he's put together a little précis saying that Otto may have been an Israeli spy, because Israel and North Korea are not exactly the best of friends. North Korea refuses to recognize Israel, and apparently in 1988 it recognized the state of Palestine. And so there's a little bit of hostility there, and Otto himself apparently went on the usual tour of Israel. He was involved in Hillel, Zionist affiliation. And so there's a possibility that he was actually arrested and locked up for espionage, in which case a sentence of 15 years is certainly reasonable. A lot of spies are shot in wartime. And again, look at the Israeli spy that sold out America's nuclear secrets, Jonathan Pollard. He got a life sentence. So let's get back to our domestic policies here and all of this swirling around all these various probes into Russian interference, or was it obstruction of justice, and this and that, and it's going back. Something very weird is going on over at the House Intelligence Probe involving Russian interference in the 2016 election. And apparently one of the key witnesses is a former informal advisor to the Trump campaign, Carter Page. You've probably heard that name before. And he was scheduled to testify at a closed hearing of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. But Democrats on the committee blocked the testimony. Now, this is the guy that Democrats said was the supposed mastermind of this link to Russia, and you would think they're interested in hearing his story. But no, we don't. We need more time. We'll reschedule him for a few months down the road. Maybe they're afraid of another embarrassment like happened with James Comey, where they actually get him up under oath and he says, no, there was no obstruction of justice and we found no evidence of Russian collusion. But this whole Russiagate thing is a giant flop. And the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton, liberals in general, and the corporate media literally bet the farm that the Russiagate investigation was going to get Donald Trump out of office and then catapult Democrats to victories in this year, in 2018 and 2020. The gamble is not paying off. The elections in Georgia and South Carolina were actually quite a shock to the liberal Democrats. They thought they had a lock on it. Even the corporate media, especially CNN, they were out there saying, oh, yes, this is the Democrats' comeback. This is a voter mandate on Donald Trump's presidency. And then the Republicans won, despite being tremendously overspent. Voters are sick and tired of this stuff. They're sick and tired of the liberal Democrats, and they know that this Russiagate is a big pile of USDA choice bovine excrement. Amazingly enough, the corporate media has been shoving this Russia stole the election narrative down the throats of the American people. And it really hasn't worked. Earlier today there was an interview on Fox News where they're out there saying, well, we found no evidence of Russian interference with the election, which means they didn't succeed in altering the votes or the outcome, but that shouldn't be construed to mean that they weren't trying to do it. So they're still trying to salvage this whole thing. They were still trying to salvage this whole thing. Now then, Fox News was the only corporate media outlet that aired the full Trump rally last night in Cedar Rapids, Indiana. And everybody else cut away. And Trump has called out CNN on their habit of cutting the feed. Remember, again, in that Georgia 6th District special election, CNN carried the entirety of the Democratic loser's concession speech and only a couple of minutes of the Republican victor's speech. Then they cut away. Oh, we've got more important things to show you here. CNN got caught with a big goof. As you know, there was a little bit of kerfuffle over the Black Sea where an F-16 was very close to the airplane carrying Russia's defense minister, and it was chased off by a Sukhoi. And CNN actually reported it as being the Russian ambassador on board the plane, even though the event happened nearly 24 hours ago. So CNN has to be seen as one of the world's most poorly edited news websites. They don't go back and check their stories. They just put on out whatever they think, and then they wonder why they're losing audience. Meanwhile, the Democratic Election Commissioner, Ellen Weintraub, is trying to revive the Russia did it narrative, demanding probes of Russian links to Facebook, Drudge, Huffington Post, and say, my faith in democracy is shaken by all this Russian interference. And again, as Putin actually said, and Oliver Stone said, Israel interferes with our elections all the time. Nobody makes a stink about that. The U.S. interferes with other countries' elections all the time. Why is it only a bad thing when we think and cannot prove that Russia maybe, kind of, sort of, possibly did it here? Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let me just shut something down. I'm still dealing with some issues on my computer here. Now, everyone, of course, is talking about this new special counsel, Robert Mueller, former head of the FBI. And, of course, we're all supposed to think that anybody who's head of the FBI is just a swell person. Anybody who studied the history of J. Edgar Hoover understands that is simply not so. Certainly we know that Mueller, when he was head of the FBI with James Comey as his assistant, was overseeing these post-9/11 abuses of innocent Arabs. And we need to remember that this guy does not follow the Constitution or the rule of law or the Bill of Rights. He's a hatchet man. And that's why they brought him back to go after Donald Trump here. Now, Trey Gowdy, boy, I love this guy. And I'm glad he's now in a position to be able to do more investigation. Basically went after Jay Johnson on a very important issue about the DNC's claim that they were hacked by the Russians. And Gowdy just asked a very pointed question. Why would the victim of a crime not turn over a server? And that really cuts to the heart of the matter. If your house is robbed and the police come on out there and you say, well, no, you can't come in and look around, what are they going to think? Insurance fraud? And that's very legitimate. And as it turns out, nobody looked at that server. Nobody did a forensic examination from within the government. The FBI didn't. The Department of Homeland Security didn't. The CIA never did. The only basis for the claim Russia hacked the DNC servers came from CrowdStrike, a company that was working for the DNC and the Hillary campaign. And they retracted their statements last March and are refusing to testify in front of Congress. There is absolutely no basis for the continuing claim that Russia hacked the DNC servers. There is a considerable amount of evidence that those emails were walked out of the DNC by Seth Rich on a thumb drive. There's far more evidence for that than there is of Russian hacking. But the Democrats, the Hillaryites, the corporate media, again, they have bet the farm on this story of Russia hacking the DNC computers, and that's why they're trying so hard to ignore all of the new stuff that's coming out about Seth Rich, including that report from the Profiling Project that says the reason Seth Rich still had his wallet, watch, and cell phone was that he was killed by a hired killer. Now, as you know, Hillary Clinton has re-entered the popular fray. There's the music. We're going to do a station identification. More about Hillary when we come back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And so pick up where we left off before the station break. Hillary Clinton, after she got over the post-election loss hangover, and boy, she looked really bad in those few days, has re-entered the political fray. She's all over making public appearances. She's campaigning again. We don't know exactly for what just yet, but she's out there and she's making all these statements and she's urging people to resist Donald Trump. And it's not really working because according to Gallup poll, Hillary Clinton is just as unpopular today as she was last year leading up to the election. And what's really interesting is the normal trend is that losing presidential candidates over the last 25 years actually get a boost of at least 4 percentage points in their favorability after the election. Again, according to Gallup. Hillary Clinton didn't get that. People just do not like her. That's why she lost the election, in big part here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mark, are you there? Hello, Mark.
I'm right here.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear you. I don't know what was going on. Okay, anyway, what's on your mind today?
Okay. What you were just talking about CrowdStrike and about the Seth Rich murders, and the DNC server. I don't know if you know about Lee Stranahan. He used to be a reporter for Breitbart. And Breitbart gave him the heave ho because he was being too, because he was actually doing his investigations on things like CrowdStrike and all that. And he's really homing in on the DNC server, on the fact that they refused the FBI permission to look at the server. And he's also honing in on the fact that if anybody tried to interfere with our election, it was Ukraine, not Russia. So he's really good, and you can find him on YouTube. He's all over. He's got a YouTube station. He's got Populous TV, and he's got a radio show on Sputnik News.
Oh wow!
So
yeah,
really,
I'll have to track him down. I'll have to track him down on that.
He's really. They call it Fault Lines, the radio show.
Okay.
He's really digging in on this, and I think he's going to find something. He had a reputation, I understand, as an excellent reporter. I understand Steve Bannon had nothing but praise for him when he was actually running Breitbart. It's a shame what's happening with Breitbart. He's talking about the two that run it now. That guy Marlowe and Boyle, that they're total idiots. They don't really care about it. They hide stories. They don't report certain stories and all that. But this guy is right on it. He is. I mean, I think he's going to find out more about Seth Rich pretty soon too, because it's all tied together. It's all tied together. There's no question that they killed Seth Rich if he leaked the information to WikiLeaks, and it seems to be almost no doubt that he did leak the information to WikiLeaks. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, there are people who've come forward who are saying they were part of the chain, if you will. I mean, Seth Rich didn't just go right up to Julian Assange and hand him the flash drive. He handed it to a friend who handed it to another trusted friend who got it to Julian Assange.
Right.
And they've all come on out and said that, yes, Seth Rich was the leaker. Members of Seth Rich's own family have come forward to say that, yes, he told them he was going to do this. Again, all of those leaked emails, if you look at the dates, they all stop at the time when Seth Rich was assassinated. And so it's a very compelling case. But the point here is there's far more evidence that Seth Rich was the leak and killed for it than there is that Russia somehow hacked into the DNC servers.
Oh, absolutely. There's no evidence that Russia hacked into anything.
That's right.
But as far as these murders, the murders go, I mean, there's every reason to believe the DNC would have done it. I mean, it was complete. It's what do you call it again? They had absolute motive. They had the ability to do it, and they had the motive to do it. So any opportunity.
Well, so, I think what happened is when the emails came on out, they probably had a little skull session, and they said, first of all, if it came on out that one of our own people betrayed us, it makes us look bad, but we'll demonize the Russians, and it'll build sympathy for us. And I think that was the basis for the decision. By the way, saying it was the Russians was an attempt to discourage people from actually reading the emails. And I remember there was one of the corporate media talking heads, I don't recall who it was, who literally came on out and tried to tell the audience it is against the law for you to read those leaked emails. If you read them, you could be arrested and go to jail, which is complete and absolute nonsense.
That was that fool Mario Cuomo.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, not Mario Cuomo. Chris Cuomo that said that on CNN.
Yes.
I know there's people who are going to listen to him. They're afraid. The Democrats are afraid, and I think personally, it's going to lead to more than just the Democrats if this really starts coming out.
Oh yeah, it's going to be another major credibility loss for the corporate media. And I got to tell you right now, I know I keep coming on back to this thing. I am absolutely thrilled that the History Channel had the courage to put out this 8-hour, 4-part special on America's war on drugs, because they're out there, telling everybody, yeah, the CIA was behind the cocaine epidemic of the 1980s and 1990s. And we watched another segment of the thing last night. I've got my DVR.
When is this going to be? What day is this on? What day is it?
Okay, go to History Channel. You're going to have to look on your own guide. I know it's running now. I think they just did the 4th episode last night, but I'll tell you right now, they're going to stream this thing. They're going to run it over and over and over again, or it may be on demand. But this thing is being talked up all over the place. It's getting a lot of positive coverage, along with the usual inevitable corporate media. Oh, it's all wacky conspiracy theory. You don't want to look at this. Drug kingpins are all smelly, swarthy South American people. The idea that we have drug lords in the United States. I mean, what a ridiculous idea. You silly people.
Is this the actual History Channel, or is it one of the subsidiaries?
No, it's the actual History Channel.
History too.
The actual History Channel. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's America's War. Plus, we posted the link to the website, to the webpage at the History Channel. You can watch all 4 episodes there as well.
Maybe people will start wising up with that, and with the Putin interviews with Oliver Stone, and maybe people are going to start wising up and finding out the truth. I wish Stone would go and interview Bashar al-Assad now too.
Well, I'll tell you what I would really like to see. I would really like to see, and this is a call to Rivero's Rangers, is I'm going to repost that link to the History Channel page for America's War on Drugs. And I want everybody, first of all, make sure you watch it, because it validates and vindicates everything we've been saying all over the years about what was going on in Mena, Arkansas, and the involvement of the highest levels of the American government in bringing tons of cocaine into this country. And then you forward it to your social media and your email. Everybody in America needs to watch this to understand what our government has really become.
Do they actually mention Mena in this?
Yes. They do a lot on Barry Seal. They admit that he was working for the CIA. They tie it up with George Herbert Walker Bush. I mean, it's only 8 hours. They can't do it all, obviously, because we're talking about the activities of thousands of people occurring over many, many years. But for an 8-hour distillation, they got the high points. They got the high points.
I know. I've known this for a while, and I've also saw the movie about Jerry Webb, and Alex Jones interviewed the real Freeway Rick Ross, not
Yes.
the traffic corrections officer.
He's in this, by the way.
The real guy.
Yeah, Ricky Ross is in the documentary as well. I mean, they got a lot of the former drug pilots, former CIA people, and they're all coming on out and saying, yeah, this was going on, you know, and it's powerful, it's well produced, it's well edited. I'm probably going to get the DVD set of this thing because, you know, I'm watching this, and, you know, it's almost scary. I met a few of these people, including Freeway Ricky Ross, when I was in my first marriage because my first wife had been involved in as a mule in some of that drug couriering from Central and South America into the U.S. And she actually... Say again? It was before we actually got married.
I'm really waiting for this movie to come out. I'm really waiting for this movie to come out. I think it's coming out in September with Tom Cruise playing a part of... What's that guy's name? The guy who was...
Barry Seal.
He was murdered.
Yeah, Barry Seal.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, too.
Well,
that should be good. I looked it up. It's coming out in September.
Well,
it's coming out quicker.
You know, after this History Channel show, if it does get a wide viewing, and a lot of people are talking about it, I would not be surprised. Let me finish here. I would not be surprised if the Tom Cruise version of the movie comes under pressure to sort of water down the story or try and shift it away. My concern when I first started watching America's War on Drugs is they were going to try and say, well, it was just these factions of the CIA, it wasn't an official project, and, you know, we don't always know what our people are doing. But no, they tied it right up to the highest levels of the CIA, to Felix Rodriguez, and all the way up to George Herbert Walker Bush. And people need to see this.
Yeah. By the way, yesterday, Joe Biggs was in InfoWars again. Hopefully he's going to be back. And he was talking about, what's the guy, Michael Hastings. This is another one. This is another man that was absolutely, I'm just about 100% sure that he was murdered by CIA or somebody in the deep state when they hacked into his car, and Ball 7 shows that they have the ability to do it. So that's another thing needs to be investigated really thoroughly. And there's something common with this family of Seth Rich and with Michael Hastings. They all wanted to talk and find out things, and all of a sudden they just clammed up. They clammed up to Joe Biggs even at that time. And the thing is, that's probably because they're being threatened. I would imagine so.
Or they were bought off. And, you know, I think if you're the family member of somebody who's been assassinated and the call to patriotism doesn't work and even the threats don't work, there's probably a level of money that will get you to look the other way and just say, I'm going to get on with my life because I can't bring this person back anyway. So who knows? But again, you need to see this special, this story, America's War on Drugs.
I'm going. Yeah. They'll probably replay it again, right?
I would imagine so. But again, on the next commercial break, I'm going to post the link directly to History Channel's page for this show. You can watch all the episodes there, and then please email it to all your friends. Put it on all your social media. This really needs to go viral.
Okay, appreciate that, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Do a quick little shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Actually, they joined about 5 minutes ago, but we were caught up in that phone call. Okay, we're going to go back to the telephones here. Brian in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I live in Georgia. I also live in the 6th District that just made the Guinness Book for being the most expensive in history. Some interesting things that came out early on that surprised me. John Ossoff doesn't even live in the 6th District. I mean, he was literally a Washington operative that was just parachuted in here to flip the district to the Democrats. I did not know that you could legally run in a district where you aren't even a resident, but I guess anything goes now.
Yeah, and apparently there was a big problem with people who had come in from Ossoff's neighborhood to vote for him, and then were told because they didn't actually live in that district they couldn't vote.
Yeah, I will say though he had a lot of foot soldiers, and I'm sure with 23 million you can buy a lot of, troops, but they just blanketed the district with Ossoff yard signs. And if you were just sort of traveling through and didn't know the district, you'd say, well, my God, this guy Ossoff, I mean, he's got so much visible support. Just no point in even running against him. I mean, he's got this one in the bag. But couple of things about what seemed to me part of the Democrats' playbook was in the spring we had a jungle primary, just like we did for the national election. There were 18 people on the ballot trying to get this seat, and a lot of them, I think, were just somebody paid their filing fee, and they were just put on the ballot just to clutter it up and fragment the opposition, because just like with Hillary, you know, John was their poster boy from the very beginning. That's who that was going to be their candidate. I have to say that I didn't vote for Karen in the primary. She's sort of a perennial candidate in Georgia. She was Secretary of State. She ran a failed campaign for governor. The reason I remember her so vividly was I was part of a grassroots organization that sued her as Secretary of State because she was in office when they rolled out electronic voting in Georgia. And, of course, the voting came along with all the problems, the glitches, fraud that we all know. And they sued her. But anyway, and I was in a packed Fulton County courtroom when the judge basically, he just gave the case, ruled in favor of the Secretary of State, and so we still have the voting. But other than the fact that I'm glad the Democrats couldn't use this as a victory celebration. Another thing about Karen Handel, she is definitely going to be voting with the GOP establishment. I mean, if they want, you know, more money for the military, if they want more Russian sanctions, you know, she's going to vote with the establishment in Washington. So she's no Cynthia McKinney. But anyway, it was a very interesting election.
Yes, it was, and again, it was almost a miniature version of the presidential election, where everybody just assumed the Democrat was going to win. The media was already set to have the party, and as the results were coming on in, especially at CNN, they were out there saying, "Oh yes, this is going to be this is the mandate against Trump, and we're going to." And then the final results came on in, and just watching their faces,
they were shell shocked.
They were absolutely shell shocked. They thought they had this in the bag.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, so we're going to let you.
That's all I had.
All right, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now then, we're still seeing a bunch of these liberals in the corporate media literally talking about how much they want President Trump to simply die. And the latest one is Michael Chabon, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning American novelist, and he's expressing his hope. He actually hopes Donald Trump has a massive stroke and is carted out of the White House on a gurney. I think that qualifies as hate speech. Okay, and again, I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump. But let's talk about what he is doing and a difference of opinion and have an informed, educated debate. Don't start hurling names and implying threats. That gets you nowhere, except a knock on the door from the Secret Service. Now, I want to do a little bit of a flashback here, and I posted this on the main page, and I'm probably going to have to take this through the commercial break because it's a little long. Some years ago, back in 1971, there was an experiment done at Stanford University by psychology professor Philip Zimbardo using college students, and this was funded by the U.S. Office of Naval Research as an investigation into the cause of difficulties between guards and prisoners at the United States Navy and Marine Corps. And so what Philip Zimbardo did is he set up a simulated prison, actually built a small prison block in a building at Stanford University, and he recruited a bunch of students for what was going to be a long-running experiment. And some of the students were going to play guards, and some of the students were going to play prisoners. And which ones got to be guards and which ones got to be prisoners was decided entirely by chance. Nobody knew what they were going to be until they were pulling lots out of the box, or however it was done. It was entirely by chance. And they ran this simulation, and they had to cancel the experiment early. And I'll explain why after we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And we were talking about the Stanford prison experiment. Took place back in 1971 at Stanford University. Psychology professor Philip Zimbardo built a simulated prison block, with cement blocks and actual bars, and the locks on the doors worked, and the prisoners were treated like prisoners. And everything that they needed was in there, shower room. It was a very real setup. And they chose which students would be the prisoners and which would be the guards entirely by chance. And the experiment had to be canceled after just 6 weeks. And some of the students even quit before then, because what became very obvious, the psychology of perceived power, which is what the study was all about, the guards immediately started becoming abusive and more abusive. And the more time went on, the more serious the abuse got, bordering on torture itself. Apparently Philip's girlfriend, and now his wife, is the one who said, this has to stop. And it was a big shock and very controversial, a lot like Sidney Milgram's obedience experiment about inflicting pain on command here. And I started thinking about the Stanford prison experiment when I was talking with Miriam Azizi about how Israel's government is treating the people of Israel. And it occurred to me that this dynamics of those in power and those who are being held captive apply to other situations than just prisons. Because looking at the world around us, what's going on in Israel, what's going on in our own country, it is obvious that any group, whether it be government, bankers, or clergy, or whatever, that imprisons another group, either politically, economically, or religiously, will abuse the captive population, and over time the abuse inevitably increases. From this simple dynamic, one gets dictatorship, impoverishment, sexual abuse of children, and other evils. I've certainly observed this with our federal government over the last 30 years. Probably most of you have picked up on it as well. No matter how much you give, they want more. No matter how much you obey, they want more power. And this is the science behind the old saying that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think it was an awareness of this dark side of human nature that will surface when one has unchecked power and authority that led the founding fathers of the United States to design an intentionally weak central government with 3 separate branches that were designed to keep an eye on each other. And when any one of the branches got uppity, the other 2 would slap it down. And of course, as a last resort, the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms to hold abusive government in check. But clearly, in the face of the inevitable escalation of such abuse by our guards, it appears this nation is on a path to revolt. I don't like it. I don't want to see it. But I think it's time we accept it. Now, getting on back to America's war on drugs, it's getting positive reviews all over the place here, over at Rolling Stone. And they're calling it the secret history of the last 50 years. And it really is, because it goes back half a century. And of course, my window on all of this goes back to the 1980s. And the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. But a lot of people are talking about this. A lot of people are talking about this. Over in Blacklisted News, they have an article on it. And glowing reviews. And again, there are a few corporate media stories saying this is all silly, it's ridiculous, conspiracy theory, it's all been disproven, blah, 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 blah. Now, I do want to take issue with something that many of these articles, including America's War on Drugs and the review in Rolling Stone, got wrong. They keep describing Gary Webb as a suicide. following his story, Dark Alliance and the San Jose Mercury. Oh, all right. We got to take another break for commercials. We're going to talk about Gary Webb when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the so-called suicide of Gary Webb. Now, the story of Gary Webb, he was a reporter with the San Jose Mercury News, and he basically was looking into the crack epidemic that was hitting California, and very quickly discovered that the cocaine was coming from the Central Intelligence Agency. And he wrote a series of articles collectively called Dark Alliance. He was then fired from his job. The corporate media attacked him, discredited him. And then he was found dead, and he was declared a suicide. And unfortunately, again, America's War on Drugs and the Review and Rolling Stone, they're going along with that suicide line. But he was found with 2 .38 caliber gunshots to his head. And what the coroner actually said was, well, I know it seems odd, but there's a possibility it was a suicide. And on that basis, he said cause of death, suicide. I seriously don't think so. And so a lot of wet work involved in this drug business. But again, suicide in the United States, under the law, when you find a body, an unattended death, homicide is the legal presumption and suicide must be proven, because there are so many cases where people will commit a murder and try and make it look like a suicide. So you assume it's a murder until you can confirm it's a suicide. We went through that same thing with Vincent Foster back in 1994. Was found dead in Fort Marcy Park. Oh, must be a suicide. No, you're supposed to treat it like a potential homicide first, and of course they didn't. And tried to silence the witnesses there and all kinds of skullduggery. The FBI literally shaved off 6 inches of soil from the area where the body was found and carted it away. They did the same thing to that compound in Waco, Texas. Didn't want anybody walking on in there and finding anything embarrassing. Now then, getting on back to what's really going on with Dark Alliance, there's a gentleman named Bo Greitz, and he's a soldier, a hero. A lot of people considered him the template for the character of Rambo in those Sylvester Stallone movies. And he put out a book and later a video, which I don't think has been turned into a DVD, which is going to make it hard to find, and maybe it's on YouTube or something. It ought to be. Where he was basically out there saying that Vietnam was a cover for the CIA's Air America to smuggle opium back to the United States of America. And they were putting it inside the body bags of the American kids being killed in Vietnam. They were buying the opium from a drug lord named Kun Sa, flying it down in their Air America planes, and then putting it on the aircraft that were headed for the United States of America. So the CIA has been doing this for a very, very long time. So let's turn to Afghanistan. Apparently, Afghan opium production is now 40 times higher than it was since at the time of the U.S. invasion. Remember, the Taliban had all but eradicated opium production in Afghanistan. If you were caught with a poppy, they were going to take your hand off. Draconian, but obviously it worked. And now, of course, we have photos of the opium poppies blooming and being guarded and protected by the so-called coalition forces. And we even have pictures of some of these soldiers literally handling the sacks of the raw opium. So it's out. That's where it's coming from. And there's been a surge in both legal and illegal opiates here in the United States of America. In fact, story out of InfoWars, emergency room visits for painkillers surge 99% as overdoses spike across the U.S. And further in the article, they identify it's specifically opioid painkillers because they are addicting. People will want to take more of them, and it's very, very dangerous. Another article that came on out here from Breitbart, Obama-era drop in anti-drug programs fuel heroin use among women and children. And they're basically pointing the finger at Barack Obama for defunding opium eradication efforts in Afghanistan. Well, there never really were any opium eradication efforts in Afghanistan following the U.S. invasion. In fact, the corporate media came on out and quoted the government as saying, well, if we make them stop growing opium, these farmers will starve to death. They'll have no means of a livelihood, and that's why we just have to go along with it. But that's ridiculous. Obviously, these farmers were all growing something when the Taliban was in charge. Can't they go back to that? They're not going to want to, of course. Growing opium is far more lucrative crop. But again, and this is a point that History Channel's America's War on Drugs makes, is the hypocrisy of a government that on one hand is out there talking about a war on drugs, and on the other hand is actually bringing this stuff in. So what's really going on in there? Now, there is another video, and it's a little bit long, but you're probably going to want to watch it. And it's called The Simple Truth About the Drug War. And they're talking about how back when Richard Nixon was in office, Nixon considered his two biggest domestic obstacles, the black community, which was standing up for its civil rights, and the hippies, which formed the mainstay of the anti-Vietnam protests. And because the blacks were using heroin and the hippies were using marijuana, the criminal penalties and enforcement for those two drugs specifically were increased in order to be able to bring those populations under control, to disrupt them, to break them up, to make them look evil in the eyes of the general public. And that's what set the policy on opium and marijuana in the 1960s. It had nothing to do with whether or not they were dangerous drugs. In the case of opium, it is. It was all about control over the people. And in America's War on Drugs, they make a similar point when they point out the disparity in sentencing and enforcement between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, because crack cocaine was in the black neighborhoods. The black neighborhoods were targeted for this product, and it was being punished much more severely and much heavier enforcement than the powder cocaine, which was primarily a drug of middle-class white people. So that's what was shaping the drug policy. All right, we're going to take a step back here to this attempt to shoot Republican congressman in Alexandria. There's been a news story that came on out. This is from RINF.com. And it says, we're getting more and more information. It's getting tantalizingly close here. Hodgkinson was known to have an anger management problem, Slater said, describing the gunman as a desperate man struggling in all kinds of different ways. Hodgkinson was unemployed. His 30-year marriage was not going so well. And he suffered from taking some prescription medication. They're not saying which prescription medication. I think we need to find out. Yes, Hodgkinson had a lot of things going wrong in his life. We're all under pressure right now, one way or the other. The medications can throw you over the edge, and it's time we start taking a look at that. Now, turning to the economic news here, a lot of people are looking at cryptocurrencies. They think they're great. Bitcoin is soaring up and so forth. But again, there's no commodity base under them. They can be manipulated, and you can have problems. And the latest example comes from the cryptocurrency called Ethereum, which just had a flash crash yesterday from around $320 to around 10 cents. And apparently this was triggered by the vice president of GDAX. One of their investors placed a multi-million-dollar Ethereum sell order at 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday, and the size of the order caused the price of the currency to dip. That, in turn, started triggering some of the automated trading systems to issue stop-loss orders, followed by sell orders. In other words, the high-frequency computer-aided trading systems ran out of control and crashed Ethereum and hurt a lot of investors in the process. This was all being done by the computers and their algorithms. It's another reason why high-frequency computer trading should be outlawed. It was. They tried it back in the 1980s, and it was responsible for instability of the markets, tremendous chaos it caused, and they banned it. And about the same time they were repealing Glass-Steagall, they said, the Wall Street firms can bring back the high-frequency computer traders. And, of course, today the computers are much more powerful, the algorithms are much more powerful, and things can spin out of control that much faster. Now, McDonald's stock has hit an all-time high. Apparently, Wall Street investors think it's wonderful that McDonald's is going to replace all their cashiers with kiosks, where you will go on in and you will order whatever off a touch screen, and then you'll pay for it, presumably, with a card of plastic. And I'll tell you this right now, I'm never going to set foot in a McDonald's ever again. We have got to stop this trend of killing jobs in this country. Because collectively, our employees are collectively our customers. We are heading to an eventual outcome of all the stores being served by robots, selling products made by robots, and they stand around with nothing to do because the human buyers don't have the money to buy anything. We're on the edge of that right now. That's why car prices are so low, appliance prices are so low. They're trying to lure buyers in. Nobody's got any money, and nobody wants to borrow any money because they are uncertain about what's going to happen in the economy. They don't want to take out a loan where 3 months from now they lose their job and they can't make the payments. They don't want that. Things are going really bad over in Illinois. They're basically in a meltdown. Basic services are being put on hold. According to this article over an Investment Watch blog, it's looking more and more like Illinois is going to basically pirate what remains in the pension funds, trying to deal with their debt. And we're seeing this all over the United States. We're seeing it all over the world. The government has amassed simply too much debt for it to handle. And remember, as you drive wages and salaries down, that revenue stream also dries up. And this is all money junkie thinking. More debt is good. Lower salaries and wages. We'll find customers somewhere. It doesn't work. For an economy to function smoothly and efficiently, there has to be a recycling mechanism where wealth is brought down from where it accumulates at the top of that economic pyramid and gets back to the bottom, where ordinary working people can trade their labor for decent wages and salaries and then pump that wealth back into the economy at the bottom. If you take away that recycling mechanism, which happens under fascism, sooner or later that economy implodes. And we're headed there. We're headed there. And nobody who is in charge sees it. Or if they see it, they're too dependent on the system to try and generate a change. New York City is now also on the verge of a pension crisis. And again, all of these defunded pensions go back to the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud. Because remember, when that was all going on, Wall Street's rating agencies rated these bundles as AAA that made it legal for pension funds to buy them. Then the fraud collapsed, the bubble burst, the pensions were defunded, and that's why they're in trouble right now. You know, it almost reminds me of one of the wonderful videos from George Carlin, where I think you probably remember it from the quote, "It's a big club and you're not in it." And he actually said in that little monologue, he says, sooner or later, they're going to come for your retirement. They want it all. And it does seem like that. And that's addictive behavior. These money junkies want all the wealth to themselves, and they want to see everybody else just naked and homeless, starving to death in the streets because that's what makes them feel they're rich. It's not how much wealth they have that makes them feel rich. It's how much difference in wealth they see between themselves and you that makes them feel rich. It's not enough that they're rich. Everybody else has to be poor, or their money just doesn't matter anymore. Meanwhile, we may be on the verge of a trade war with the European Union. The United States is proposing to slap stiff tariffs on steel imports from Europe, and it's hitting Brussels very hard. And the EU's trade commissioner is saying the European Union will strike back tariffs or sanctions on American products. Now, right now, unfortunately, the U.S. has to import a lot of steel because most of our steel mills that we used to build this nation, and pointedly to fight 2 world wars, are rusting hulks. They were abandoned to the elements years ago. We need to start looking at building new steel mills and bring the steel making back home. Meanwhile, as you know, despite the recent downturns on the NASDAQ, the tech firms are doing very, very well. You have Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook are the 5 most valuable listed companies in the world, in that order. And they have a total market value of $2.9 trillion. And they're hoarding huge amounts of cash. Now, maybe they're planning a stock buyback at some point, which very successful companies will often do to try and return more control to themselves. Some publicly traded companies have actually succeeded in going back to being private. But it's going on anyway. To nobody's surprise, up in Washington State, health insurance providers are proposing over 20% rate increase in 2018. These are the Obamacare providers. Now, when we come back from this next commercial break, we're going to take another look at the Senate health care bill and what it really means. So stay tuned, don't touch that dial, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I know we went over this with that phone call earlier in the show. But again, I want to get back to the Senate health care bill because there are some aspects we need to look at. First of all, in its present form, it does not look like the Senate health care bill is going to pass. There are already at least 4 GOP senators who are going to vote against it. And all it takes is 3 voting against it for it to die, because it's presumed all the Democrats are going to vote against it anyway. And one of the areas of concern are the deep cuts to Medicaid, on which many people across the country are dependent. And this may be an effort to get people who are currently on Medicaid to seek private health insurance. A lot of people are screaming that the new health care bill gives massive tax cuts to the wealthy. But the other side of the story is what it's doing is it's repealing the tax increases on the wealthy from the original Obamacare. And supposedly it's funding the loss of revenue by the cuts to Medicaid. Now, one of the good things out there is they're ending the mandate that Americans have health insurance. And as I said before, this is a good thing. It's going to force the health insurance companies to go back to trying to make the consumer happy in order to sell their product. When the government is forcing you to buy something, the price is going to go up and the quality is going to go down. We went through that when auto insurance was made mandatory. The premiums went right through the roof. And the service and everything else went down. It was just a giveaway to the car insurance companies. And again, you should have car insurance and you should have health insurance, but we need to have a system where you're getting the best value for your dollar rather than being plundered for the benefit of corporations, which unfortunately is an aspect of living in a fascist economic dictatorship. Another article, this one came out of 12160. Repeal and replace is a gigantic transfer of wealth from the lowest income Americans to the highest income Americans. I think almost everything the government has done over the last 2 decades could be described that way as we descend into fascism. Loot the people to make the rich richer still, overall. But again, the qualifier here is that these are not really a cut in taxes on the wealthy. It's repealing the tax increase from the original Obamacare. So we need to be very, very careful about this. There's a very interesting article. It came out from unreportedtoday.com, and it's saying the U.S. economy is a perverted, neo-feudal, rent-seeking abomination. And I wish they wouldn't sugarcoat it like that. I'd rather they tell us how they really feel. But they're going on back to all these taxpayer-funded bailouts for the bankers and Wall Street and TARP and QE and all the rest of it by a government that very clearly values banks above the American people. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, Donald Trump is out there pushing an idea that would impose a 5-year ban on welfare for all new immigrants. He made this announcement at an Ohio rally and basically said those seeking immigration into our country must be able to support themselves financially. It makes a lot of sense to me, because one of the reasons we have such a huge problem with illegal immigration and the refugees is they're coming to the country thinking it's a land of milk and honey, and they're going to get all kinds of free stuff. These refugees coming on in are actually getting more government support than our veterans. And it's all about this, global government situation here, but it makes perfect sense. We simply can't afford to even take care of our own people right now. We shouldn't be trying to take on all the destitute of planet Earth here. Now, as you know, the media has made a big deal that Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic are refusing migrants, and it's leading to a clash with Brussels, which is going to impose fines on them. The European Union is taking Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic to court for refusing to take in 160,000 migrants under this agreement made in 2015. And they're asking for a fine of 250,000 euros per migrant. That is a huge, huge chunk of money. Here's what the corporate media is not telling you. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic are accepting migrants that pass the basic vetting. The ones they're turning away are the ones that are not checking out. They've got criminal records. They're found to be making false statements in their applications. And that makes perfect sense for anybody. When you have a right to control who's coming over your border. And if who's knocking at your door has a criminal record, a history especially of violent crime, or you catch them being deceptive, yeah, turn them away. It makes perfect sense. But for the globalists, for George Soros, their idea is that everybody, rapist, mugger, infected with Ebola, has a right to go anywhere on the planet. That's the agenda they're pushing. Except for Israel. Israel's message to refugees is go back to Africa or we'll put you in prison. So, now up in Germany, do you remember the big stink happened back in 2013 when Angela Merkel literally, she was in a meeting with EU leaders and they had an EU flag and there was a little flag of Germany and she literally threw it away. Big stink over that. Well, now, of course, she's in this desperate bid for a 4th term as chancellor. And now, all of a sudden, the German flag is a good thing. And she's waving it around saying, see, I believe in Germany. And I don't think the German voters are going to fall for it. And the German people are very unhappy at what's been going on in Germany with the mass immigration and slavery to the EU and the ECB. And if Angela Merkel gets a 4th term as chancellor, I'm going to say definitely need to look at election fraud. Getting on back to that Grenfell Tower and its horrible, horrible tragedy, there was a big discussion over whether this cladding was legal or illegal to use. That kind of cladding, the thin aluminum with the polystyrene insulation, is illegal to use in the United States because it's known to be a fire hazard. And the initial reports were saying, well, this cladding is legal in Great Britain. As it turns out, there's a qualifier on it. It's legal to use on 1- or 2-story dwellings It is banned for use on taller buildings, and obviously the Grenfell Tower qualifies as that. And so it burned right down to the core. Hundreds may be dead, and the tower is still standing. The only good news coming on out about this is that the chief executive of the Kensington and Chelsea Council, Nicholas Holgate, has now resigned over this matter. This was the guy who was in charge of the company that was in charge of maintaining and the renovation of the building, and he's now resigned, trying to get away before things really get ugly. Now, earlier in the show, I was talking about the erasing of Confederate memories in this country, and it was in the context of people in Europe have reminders all around them of what they suffered in World War I and World War II. And the only war, you know, in the United States, the last big one fought on U.S. soil was the Civil War. And it's rapidly disappearing. And there is this campaign to take down all Confederate memorials, all Confederate statues, ban the Confederate flag. And again, it's trying to erase our history, to make us forget who we are and where we come from. But there's been a little bit of a setback because apparently there was a move to take down a Confederate monument in St. Louis. And a judge has halted it, temporary stay, because apparently there is some confusion over who actually owns the monument, and there is another trial underway right now trying to figure out who is the legal owner of that monument. And so this judge has said you can't tear the statue down until this other trial is over. It's a temporary stay, but better than nothing. We're going to do a shout-out to our affiliates just now rejoining our network. There's a very alarming story. This came out of gatesofvienna.net. It's a translated article, and it's talking about an incident where two asylum seekers in Germany were harassing these girls. And one of the girls called her father on the cell phone, and the father came on over. One of the asylum seekers had apparently exposed himself and was pleasuring himself, I guess I can put it that way, and not upset the FCC. And apparently got into an altercation, and he slapped the two asylum seekers. And the police showed up, and one of the asylum seekers was still threatening the daughter's boyfriend, who was also there. And so the two asylum seekers were arrested, but the police also are charging the father and the boyfriend of the girl with criminal charges for assaulting these asylum seekers. And it's things like this that I think are going to work very much against Angela Merkel when she runs for re-election. Meanwhile, over in Hungary, their prime minister is doubling down on his commitment to not allow Muslims into his country, describing them as freeloaders, rapists, and jihadists. And this dovetails with that other story saying that these countries are allowing immigrants to come on in if they pass the vetting process. If it looks like they're going to be a benefit to society rather than a burden, they're allowed on in. Meanwhile, 1/3 of the current FBI terror investigations are refugees allowed in by Barack Obama. 1/3. It's got to be stretching the anti-terror resources just a little bit. Well, you're probably looking at all this stuff, you're reading all this stuff, and I may be stating the obvious with this article from Russia Insider, but the wheels are coming off the globalism wagon. People are seeing what's coming. And again, if you get back to that Stanford prison experiment, what happens when the entire planet is a giant prison? And all of our guards are in just one capital city. The abuse will increase over time. It's inevitable. That's why our nation was supposed to be different, with an intentionally weak central government split into 3 branches designed to keep an eye on one another, so they didn't get too big for their britches. And unfortunately, over time, we have lost that. It's been taken away from us. It's been stolen. Now, over in Montana, they're getting themselves inserted into the transgender controversy. There's a conservative group is trying to get a ballot petition because the legislature wouldn't touch it. Wants to get a petition drive to get a measure on the ballot to decide whether transgender people must use public restrooms and locker rooms designated for their gender at birth. And this group, the Montana Family Foundation, is hoping to place the matter on next year's fall ballot. And, of course, people up there are saying, well, you know, the transgenders have rights. The transgenders have rights. Well, what about the rights of the non-transgenders? We only account for 99.9% of the population. Don't we have a right to decide who we're going to be sharing bathrooms and showers and locker rooms with? I think we have that right. And again, I think we can just solve all this matter with doors on the restrooms. Instead of saying girl and boy, just say, you know, the genitalia names. I don't know if I can say those on the radio either. But again, this is part of this attack on our sense of self, our sense of identity. They want to get us confused over what bathrooms to use. Gender is fluid. You may not really know what gender you are. Apparently, they're starting to aim materials at children to convince them they don't know what gender they are. Again, it's an attack on your identity, your sense of self. Because people with a strong sense of self, people with a strong sense of who they are, where they come from, what their history is, what their family's done, they're hard to control. So, apparently Jeff Bezos, who is now acquiring Whole Foods, is going to rescind Whole Foods' promise to label GMOs on everything by next year. Not going to happen now. I think Jeff, and I know Amazon is a very wealthy company and he's a very rich man, but again, he's destroying the brand with this. And I think that the people who shop there aren't going to shop there anymore because they go to these Whole Foods and they pay the higher prices for the assurance they are getting safe, healthy, organic, natural food. And if you're not going to get that, they're not going to go to the store. They're going to go to whatever supermarket's closest. Under Jeff Bezos, Whole Foods is abandoning their customer base. The same mistake that Radio Shack and so many other companies have made. So let's talk about GMOs here because there's been an alarming development. Most of the genetic editing that is being done today uses a technology called CRISPR-Cas9, and it's described as molecular scissors for its ability to snip out pieces of genetic material and paste it in someplace else. And this technology is now so commonplace, even high schoolers are playing with it. And a study out this week in the journal Nature Methods reminds us it's still a new technology and it's not proven. And apparently researchers at Columbia University discovered that although CRISPR did manage to successfully edit the particular gene that they were aiming at, they were correcting blindness in mice as an experiment, they discovered that CRISPR caused mutations to more than 1,000 other unintended genes. And apparently it's been known for a long time that when you are using CRISPR on DNA, that it's going to cause damage to other places. These are called mutations. And it may be that the technology is still defective, or it may be the fact that DNA is incredibly self-referential. And because you've snipped and pasted and cut one part, eventually it's going to alter other portions of the DNA. You look at that DNA molecule, and the traditional view is the spiral, the helix. But the reality is that when you actually look at the structure of a gene, it is a strand of DNA that is incredibly folded in on itself, and it's constantly moving, sliding past itself, trading information. And if you've got an altered gene, it can have catalytic effects on other portions, leading to more mutations. This is very reckless and dangerous. Now, again, in cooked food, genetically edited DNA is not a threat to you. It's been broken down into its amino acids. The problem is that in the altered life form, malformed DNA can lead to malformed protein expression. And as you eat food from genetically engineered plants and animals, your body is going to try and take in those proteins and try and fit them into the appropriate receptors in your body chemistry where they're supposed to go. And they'll probably go on in, but they're not a perfect fit. And nobody knows what kind of ill effects this might result in. We may not find out for a very, very long time what these effects are, especially in a culture that works very hard to keep such things secret from the consumers in order to maximize profitability. Look how hard the vaccine industry has worked to suppress information on the toxicity and ineffectiveness of vaccines. Look how hard Monsanto has worked to suppress negative information about GMO. We live in a society where we literally cannot trust what we are buying at those supermarkets. We don't know. We're not being allowed to know. And even the manufacturers don't really know. They haven't looked. Somebody could make a mistake that winds up sterilizing the human race, and we don't realize it until it's too late. Everybody's involved. That may have happened with the epicyte gene. You know, I keep telling everybody that I am presuming the universe is full of life and intelligent life, and everybody says, well, why haven't they shown up here yet? And my usual answer is, why would they bother? Do you stop and visit every anthill you pass as you drive down the freeway? But there may be another reason, and that is that intelligent life on other planets reaches a stage where they start tinkering with their own biochemistry and code of life, and somebody makes a mistake and they go extinct. That could be an explanation for why we've never had extraterrestrial visitors. And no, I'm not taking phone calls about UFOs and space aliens and Elvis and the rest of it. Now, another little article, and this gets back to Hodgkinson. Mental health issues are at the forefront of politics, but the fact is that no one is looking into the causes, is what should concern us all. And again, are we seeing corporate profitability being protected? Because we know that one of the potential causes of mental health issues are these prescription psychiatric medications, which can cause a lot more damage than good. I remember one of the tragic stories that we covered on this subject some years ago. This was in Great Britain. Young lady, successful, doing very, very well, hit a little bit of a rough patch. Doctor put her on an antidepressant, and her behavior got really bizarre. And the doctor put her on another medication, made things worse. Put her on another medication, made things worse. She wound up being confined to a mental hospital. And she'd started the process a perfectly normal, functioning human being. So, we do need to look at the cause, and we need to look honestly at what's going on. Are we drugging our entire population into bizarre behavior? And again, I want to know what prescription medication Hodgkinson was on when he shot up those Republicans. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And just had one of the listeners write on in with an email about the Grenfell Tower saying they should build high-rises out of that magic flame-proof paper used in the passports that always seem to conveniently show up and point the finger of blame following a false flag terror attack. Yeah, that might actually work. All right, we're going to take some phone calls here. Alex in San Antonio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because I wanted to talk about spaceships and aliens, but then you already said we can't do that. No, I was calling because I don't know if you read this today, but there was about 230 significant arrests made of Hollywood elite, and they're reserving the names. And I was just, I know that they say causation does not equal correlation, but there's been something I've been noticing. Up to right now, we have almost 11,000 people global arrests that have been made of people that are in the elite circles and people of influence in different countries. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if that is not the reason why all the world seems to be, going into chaos. One terror attack here, another one there. I mean, it seems like everywhere these elite circles are firing back. You know what I mean? I mean, the thing that I find most, I guess, incredible is what's happening to Qatar, where they were kind of like left, because I've been to Qatar, I've been to the Middle East, I've done a lot of business there, and most of their population is indentured servants. Yeah. They're from Bangladesh and they're from India, and they have their passports taken away from them, and it's a plethora of just organized crime. Like, you can go there and talk about certain things very freely, that would otherwise land you in jail in a place like America.
Okay, yeah, I understand where you're getting at with that one. Getting on back, I mean, you're kind of all over the place here. I have not been following the child abuse arrests. I understand they are happening, and I understand they're not getting a lot of coverage in the corporate media, and I'm not at all surprised that in Hollywood the names of the people being arrested are not being released because, Hollywood has a lot of pull. And, the main players over there are always protected, not because anybody particularly likes them or what they were doing, but because of their bankability. You want to preserve that capacity of a movie star to make huge amounts of money by drawing people into the movie theater. And if they have some bizarre behavior on the side, well, you just protect it. And that just enables them to go on with the bizarre behavior. And you see that in Hollywood. You see it also in the New York entertainment centers. You see it in places like Las Vegas. That really does go on a lot. Now, the reason why so many elites seem to be engaging in these vile behaviors, I think, is an expression of, I can get away with it. Remember when Jeffrey Epstein, when he was doing all this stuff in Florida, he got arrested. So as soon as he got out of that trouble, what's he do? He goes off to the Caribbean and he buys an island and he sets up his new little Lolita palace down there where nobody's going to bother him. And so that's an expression of personal wealth and power. I can get away with things that ordinary people cannot. And I can imagine that a lot of crimes of all kinds by the elite are just because they want to know that they can get away with it. If you remember the Thomas Crown affair, there's been 2 different movies made of it. And here's a guy who's insanely rich, and his hobby is being an art thief. He could buy the paintings, but he'd rather steal them to prove he can get away with it. So that appears to be part of, what happens to you when you get very rich. There was even an article that we had on the website a couple of days ago where psychologists are saying that as you rise in corporate life and to become a director of the board of the CEO, your brain actually does go through some changes that changes how you view the world. And I'm not at all surprised at that. See the same thing with very humble people who rise to the top of Hollywood and they turn into absolute monsters here. Alex, we got to take a break for commercials. We're going to let you go. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the telephones here. Don in Louisiana, I think, or Los Angeles, I'm not sure. What's on your mind today?
Hello, it's Iowa.
It's Iowa. Oh, I'm sorry. On this display, the L and the I look the same.
All right. Well, anyway, you were talking about glyphosate. I mean, you were talking about GMOs.
Yes.
And I was wondering, since I live here in the middle of Iowa in the GMO country here, and they use a lot of glyphosate. But what I wondered since I moved up here, and I like it here, but I've kind of wondered. It seems to me you can't get away from glyphosate anywhere. You're in Hawaii where they got golf courses, right? They use everybody uses glyphosate. People use.
I live right on the edge of a golf course here. If you ever need any golf balls, I got lots of them, for free to send you. It's become ubiquitous in the environment. They're spraying produce with it because it helps them last longer. They're spraying it on various feminine hygiene products. I don't even know why they're doing that. But it's become that they're just spraying it everywhere, and it's been declared a probable carcinogen. That French study that Monsanto went to such lengths to get retracted, showed these rats exposed to glyphosate just developing these huge, huge tumors. And again, it's a case of profits over public health.
Well, if you look on here, I looked on Google. I tried to Google glyphosate toxicity rating by state, and you get a widely differing opinion. Some of them said the government officially has the toxicity level 3, which is not very toxic. It's almost safe. That's what they say.
Well, they also told us Saddam had nuclear weapons.
Right. Well, they say that, but then, like you say, the French study said that some countries in Europe don't have it. Right? They say they will not allow any glyphosate. Is that what's going on now?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of countries don't want glyphosate.
Russia.
Russia's banned GMO, so is China, and the EU is actually talking about banning glyphosate as well because of the carcinogenic risk. And, of course, Monsanto is still out there trying to push this stuff onto everybody. And their goal is to basically take a monopolistic control of all food production. Where, they're talking about, in some countries, they're criminalizing farmers who use heritage seeds. That's how out of control.
It's a bad deal.
It is a bad deal.
But, I mean, for just the average guy like you and me, we don't have the ability to change we can't snap our fingers and make Monsanto go away. So we have to live in America. So, what I was wondering is, does it make any difference where you live? It seems to me it's everywhere. Yeah. I'm right in the middle of corn and soybean country here.
Well, you may be getting a little more airborne exposure to it than somebody who lives in a city and is only exposed to glyphosate on the food that they eat rather than the environment as a whole. But it's a genuine risk. And the fact is, nobody knows, and we are finding out now. Nobody really wants to know. As Dr. Dufault was telling us, the job of the FDA is just to make sure everything has an accurate label. They do not test for food safety whatsoever. It's left up to the manufacturers, who obviously have a vested financial interest in getting the product to market as quickly as possible and pretending there isn't a problem.
Right. Okay, well, basically, it's everywhere in America. It's probably, and then as far as the other countries, it depends, right? But in Europe, it's not. You might be better off in Europe or in Russia.
Well, again, they're trying to ban the glyphosate in Europe and many other countries. I don't know how long it takes for the glyphosate to decay in the natural environment. I presume that being a very volatile chemical, that it will probably decompose very, very quickly, unlike the modified genes in the GMO food, which of course are going to continue as long as that species survives.
Yeah. Well, what do you think will happen? I mean, people don't like it. They're trying to buy, if they have a chance, they try to buy organic stuff if they have enough money. I mean, and really the money is not that much more if you try to get non-GMO stuff if you can. But I don't know. I mean,
I think right now, the best thing you can do if you've got a local farmers market around your home is you ought to be buying as much of your food from them as you possibly can, because you literally can no longer trust what is in those corporate supermarkets.
Well, I don't see how you can trust the farmers market either. They might spray their tomatoes not with glyphosate, but they're with something.
Well, again, there are differing degrees of danger with the pesticides, but most, we've been to the farmers market down here at the bottom of the hill, and when they say they're not using Roundup, I tend to believe them. They're pretty straight people, and they understand that their customers are coming to the farmers market because they want to avoid that stuff. They're not going to kill their customer base by going back
I'll start asking.
Roundup.
Well, yeah, I think we've got farmers markets around here, but I haven't asked them specifically do they use Roundup or not.
Okay.
But I don't know. Any kind of chemical is a chemical. I don't know which one's worse. I mean, if they spray for this, spray for that, they spray some other kind of chemical. None of that stuff is good for you.
Okay, let's see. I'm looking right now. This is from the California Department of Agriculture. Apparently, glyphosate takes 96.4 days to decay. That's its half-life. So I was correct. It doesn't last in the environment forever.
Well, that's what they say, yeah.
Well,
okay, well, that's enough of that for now. I guess I'll let you go. Okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jeff in the Twin Cities. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I went into a Starbucks today, and both bathrooms are male, female, and handicapped, and all they have in there is a toilet. There's no urinals, and there's space for, get together with and move around with, a wheelchair. Okay.
Okay.
Now, this weekend is the big Gay Pride Festival and Parade in Minneapolis. People come from all over the world. And it was in the paper today that for the first time ever, the police are not welcome to participate in the parade. Maybe this is part of this weaponized liberal pushback.
Yeah, that could get ugly.
And then the other thing is that we're in Minneapolis, the city council is imposing a $15 an hour wage minimum on restaurants employees with no tip credit, and all the locally owned restaurants are saying we're going to have to close. We're not going to be able to make it. And yet at the same time, we have this newly majority immigrant Muslim culture that is starting businesses all over, all the way, up and down every highway and at Fargo. And I think they'll probably be able to come in and take over these locations, and then they won't be forced under the same rules. And there's also a story in the paper today that there's a homeless camp near a light rail station, and the neighbors have been calling the police, the authorities, and the mayor, and they will never return their calls.
Well, there's a problem with the homeless camps, and that is they have to be somewhere. Unless they pass a law saying that, you can shoot a homeless person and with impunity, the homeless have to go somewhere. We have that problem here on the island of Oahu because we're in the middle of the ocean. It's not like these people can walk anyplace else. Now, we did have a program for a while where if a homeless person could prove that somebody on the mainland was going to take them in and give them a home, the state would buy them a one-way plane ticket, and I think it was a very humane to do. But mostly it is a case of moving the homeless camps to wherever they're going to cause the least amount of harm. In the case of Hawaii, that means away from the tourism venues. and they're constantly taking the homeless who are down in Waikiki because they're more likely to get handouts and contributions from the tourists than anybody else, and they'll basically shuffle them off. There's a gigantic homeless camp around the north shore of the Center Lock, right down here in Pearl Harbor. And I got to take a look into it because it runs right up to the back fence of this school that we were using as a filming location on Lost. And you could just look over the fence right into this homeless camp, and it was just horrible to see. And there used to be a TV series called Dog the Bounty Hunter, and it may still be on the air, but back then it was actually filmed here in Hawaii. Now they're in Arizona or something like that. And they did an episode where they went into this homeless camp searching for a bail jumper, and it created an instant scandal, but the homeless camp is still there.
There's also a problem where we have a lot of shelters in and around downtown, and the people in the shelters who should, be getting help and rehabilitation or whatever, are coming out and getting in everybody's face downtown. They don't have the money to participate by going into the bars and restaurants, but they're basically intimidating and, going after the people that do come downtown. Mm-hmm. And the police told me that they are told to not do anything unless they see a gun or hear gunfire. That we're going to have a Super Bowl here this year. The downtown is a complete mess because it's so far behind in all the construction. They're building buildings, condos, apartments everywhere, and yet they're taking away half the lanes of the major roads for bike lanes. And I almost had a dream that I see that these bike lanes will be where the homeless camps are set up back when things really start to go bad. It's like,
could easily happen.
Double the, and,
we're losing a lane on the Kamehameha Highway to the light rail. Anyway, listen, Jeff, we're starting to run out of time, and I got a bunch of callers waiting. And by the way, your comment about the unisex bathroom, obviously if the bathroom just accepts one person at a time, it doesn't matter who goes in there or what gender they think they are.
That's cool. That's cool.
Now, there's another approach. There's another approach, and it's called a unisex bathroom. When I was still working in film, I worked at a company in Rome, Italy, that had a unisex bathroom, and it was basically a common area with the sinks and the towels and tampon dispensers and everything else, and then all of the toilets were in these little stalls. And basically men and women went on in there, and it was really great because if you were in the middle of a conversation with a female coworker, you didn't have to interrupt it. You'd go on in, and after you were done in the stall, you could pick up your conversation while you're washing your hands. That actually worked very well. I was very comfortable with it. And I think it's something that ought to be introduced into the United States. It would certainly end all this nonsense about, transgender rights. Again, it was... it worked very, very well. People had privacy when they needed the privacy, and the rest of the time it was a very social environment. Anyway, Jeff, thank you for the phone call. We're going to all right. We're going to switch over to Gil in Arizona. Aloha, Gil. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, nice toasty Arizona day at 118. We're near Phoenix, actually a retirement area, Sun City, and they're replacing a lot of the grass that they have to water with decorative rock. And I'm finding out that they're constantly spraying weeds now, these tough desert-type weeds. And one thing I never hear talk about is what about all these fumes and the effects on wildlife? Birds, got to eat something. They're always scratching through these decorative rocks and pulling little, seedlings and so forth that are weeds. So I'm just wondering what it's doing to our air as well.
I'm unaware of any studies that have been done regarding glyphosates or weed killers in general, Here, it could be, it might not. The problem is we don't actually know, and that's all that we do know, is that we don't know. But as far as the decorative rock area, it sounds to me like the contractor literally didn't put enough rock down there, or maybe should have dug down the soil and laid in something that doesn't support weeds growing, maybe a hefty level of gravel, and then the decorative rock, and you wouldn't have these problems to deal with.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes it's very dusty out here, and I know that on my own property, on my lawn, we put this black plastic a couple inches down. But unfortunately, after several years, the dust accumulates, and then you have a nice layer of what we call topsoil,
okay.
And it's almost impossible to control. You know?
All right,
so,
well, I take
just
that idea back there. All right, listen, Gil, thank you for the call. We're going to switch over here to Mike in Maryland. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about Uber and what's going on with Uber, how it keeps losing money quarter after quarter and maybe years, and they don't have much overhead that I can tell, but they must be getting private investors. And my take on my conspiracy theory, if you want to call it that, about Uber is, even though they're losing money and they're getting investors, I think they plan on bankrupting all the cab companies, and when that happens, then Uber is going to jack up the price for the cars and have a monopoly. What's your take on that?
It's entirely possible, but you raise a good point. First of all, I think the concept of Uber is flawed because you don't know what kind of a person is driving that car that shows up. There have been some ugly incidents where criminals are signing on as Uber drivers in order to get victims for crimes. There are other circumstances where criminals will call for an Uber car, which doesn't have the security screen you find in a professional taxi cab, and then they'll rob the driver or other such nonsense as that. So that's a little flawed. But you're right. There's a big question mark over the vast amount of money pouring into Uber and these continuing losses. And I think at some point the investors need to get together and demand a full bookkeeping audit of just where all of that money went, because the inflow versus the outflow, given the low overhead, it just feels like something is off somewhere. And I certainly would not...
Well, if the... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, we gotta let you go anyway because we gotta take a commercial break.
If they bankrupt all the local taxi cab companies, then they can set their own price, and the investors will come out like a bandit too.
All right, we gotta let you go. Thank you for your opinion. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here, and unfortunately, we've got a bunch of callers. I don't know that I'm going to be able to take all your phone calls, but let's get started and try. Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Aloha. Listen, Mike, I want to make a quick comment. This world's getting crazier every day.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel that there's a few Adolf Hitler clones out there living. It reminds me of that movie, The Boys from Brazil. Is that movie based on a true story, Mike?
No, it isn't. And by the way, cloning Hitler's DNA would not produce another Hitler, and the movie even addressed that, saying that you would have to recreate his life up to the point where he became Hitler. And that was where that fell apart. But again, I don't know that it's necessarily that they're cloning Hitler. I think it gets back to what I said about all power corrupting and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think people who get into these positions at the top of a government, it goes right to their head, and they start playing God with the rest of the world. And this may be part of why Donald Trump has let us down on some of his most important campaign promises, such as jailing Hillary Clinton and winding down all these foreign interventions.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch to Jerry in Chicago. Jerry in Chicago, aloha. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I learned something very interesting today. I worked at a U.S. gypsum plant in East Chicago, Indiana, and I found out from our contact that they use synthetic gypsum rather than have it shipped in from one of their mines that they mine it out of. I also know that gypsum is a mineral. It's also used as a food additive. It's also used as a filler in aspirin, and it's a filler in beer. And I asked him, I says, well, where's the synthetic come from? He says it's a byproduct of the coal-burning power plants. And I says, I says, any chance of that getting into the food as a filler or into the aspirin? He goes, oh, I don't think so. I said, well, let's put it this way. If you own Bayer aspirin and you had to pay to have it sent to you and mined out of the ground and dried and crushed, I says, wouldn't it be in your advantage to get it for free from the places that are trying to give it away?
Yeah. That's very common in our economy, in our industry. You know, companies, they have leftovers for what they're doing, and they try and find an application for it to take it off their hands. Coal tar was a real serious contamination problem in the 1800s, and along with that was the idea that the railroad ties on the tracks, the wooden ties, were rotting so quickly that they were looking literally at deforesting the entire United States just to keep the trains running, until somebody realized you could paint the wooden ties with the coal tar and they would not rot. Marriage made in heaven. We know that a lot of the chemicals that companies are trying to get rid of that are toxic are literally, the fracking companies are paid to blend them in with the fracking fluid and pump them deep into the earth on the hope that they're going to stay down there. But unfortunately, they don't. There's the music. We've got to close the show. I'm sorry to everybody who did not get on the air today. You can try and call back tomorrow, Friday. A reminder that the Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of tomorrow's show. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody, especially that History Channel, America's War on Drugs. That must go viral. Every American needs to understand exactly what this government is all about. And, by the way, Mark Anderson is coming on with John Stadmiller on his show, which is immediately following the station break, so please stay tuned. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.